Hello, my name is Tim Healy, and in this video we're going to do an overview of the grid. The grid is by far the most important widget in all of Quincy, so we're going to spend a fair amount of time on it. We're going to do a number of different videos. I think this all counts up to about six videos. The overview, which is going to be this one. We've got one on column filtering. We've got one on columns in general, filtering in general. The right-click menu, which is quite expansive, and then widget interconnections. So without further ado, let me just hop into the product and we'll talk about an overview. So I've got Quincy open here. I've got no case loaded. Let's go ahead and open the grid. Let me point out a few features before we get some data in here. This will show you any filters applied that are grid level filters anyway. You will also see those indicators of those filters up here. This will allow you to export the contents of the grid. The grid has this idea of paging and of grid size. You can page forward. The grid starts at 1. If, let's say, there are 2,000 records in your case, and your grid size is 100, that means there will be 20 pages available to you. So you can either type in the number directly of the pages you want to go to, or you can go back and forward. You can also always increase the size of the grid. The columns in the grid are here. This would be object name, path. They all are filterable. You can see the filter icon right here. You can control what columns you see using this quick column option. You can select various different column sets that are available to you. You can also create your own in the administrative widget, and we'll go over that in the column video. Or you can pick specific columns by just clicking on the select here. And then you can always obviously reload. So let's go ahead and get some data into the grid and show you how it looks. We only have one case here. We click and it will tell us what it's doing. When this thing is loading, you'll see this icon loading. That means the request for data has gone out. When it stops, it means you've received data. So let me point out a couple other key features here about the grid. The first is you will see that there is a numbering here. It's going to go, in this case, 1 to 100 because our grid size is 100. So if we scroll to the bottom, we should see the number 100. If we go to the next page, that numbering should start at 100, or in this case 101, and continue on. So it gives you some context for where you are. The other thing, I actually saw this on the last page, is it will show you, based on the color, whether there are significant things. So, for example, this one, red means encrypted. So you can tell that it's also got an icon here that says encrypted, but there's very clear indication that's encrypted. Green means it's part of a bookmark. I think there might be another color, but right now I'm only aware of red and green. So green means it's part of a bookmark. Red means it is encrypted. You have the ability to check mark things. You can see there's a check mark button here. You can also select. When you check mark, it will tell you how many items are checked. If you click on this, it will click on all items loaded into the grid, and you can see we're only loading 100 items here, so now only 100 are checked. However, there are a few other important numbers we have to understand. There are how many items are in the whole case, how many are available based on whatever filter we have applied, and how many are in the grid. So what does this filtered and grid number really mean? The grid number is clear, it's the 100. Right? So if I change this number here, it will get bigger or smaller, however I change this. The filtered number is a little bit more subtle. So let me apply a filter and show you how this works. I'm going to go ahead and apply, let's do pictures. I know there are a bunch of pictures in this data set. Now it says there are 187 items that are reactive to the filter we have applied. Of those 187, we've only loaded 100 into the grid. And of those, we have a full 100 checked. If we go ahead and remove the checkings, we have 0 checked. And now if we go select any number, 1, 2, we have 2 checked. Why is this important? This is important because knowing the number of items that are reactive to your filter can affect how you use your grid size. So for example, if there are 187 items filtered, I might be tempted at this point to just drop another 0 here and click return and pull in all the data I have. Now I've pulled in the full 187. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, it should be 187. This allows me to operate on all the items that are reactive to my search relatively easily without having to worry about the paging. A few things to note here on the way the grid works relative to the data size. The more rows you pull in, the more it will tax the memory of your browser. The amount your browser gets taxed is directly related to the number of rows pulled in multiplied by the number of columns. So given that, let's talk about columns here for a second. There are 2 relevant categories of columns. There are columns that are retrieved, and there are columns that you see. The columns you see are obvious. They're these. The columns that are retrieved are slightly more subtle. In fact, Quincy pulls in a whole bunch of columns that it doesn't necessarily show to you unless you specifically ask for them. If you want to specifically ask for them, you can come in here and select All Loaded. That will show you all of the columns that are loaded. Now you can see, scrolling to the right, see how many columns it's actually pulling in that you didn't ask for. The reason it does this is it powers a number of the different widgets. These widgets need different information to function, and so we pull it in automatically so you have sort of a seamless experience. However, if you really want to tax your grid size, or if you're dealing with a really small bandwidth environment, this can be a bit of a problem. So then you want to control the amount of data you are sending or requesting from the server, and you do that by manipulating the columns. I will show you how to do that, but in the column video, so I'm just sort of highlighting that here. Let's talk about refresh. There will be times, glitches, things that shouldn't actually be the case, whether you're moving around widgets or for whatever reason your grid hasn't properly loaded. You can always go ahead and click refresh. It will again reload your data set. The last thing I want to point out in my overview video anyway is this button down here. Right now the grid size is 30. What does that mean? It means that if I shrink my size, I'm going to shrink my monitor way down here. And the only reason you would do this is if you had, I've seen this actually be relevant, if you have a really high resolution monitor and a very large screen. Let me go even one size smaller. Now on my stuff this looks ridiculous. Of course you would never do this, right? But I'm making a point here, so bear with me. The point is that you can see it's only actually loaded 30 items. Even though we've said our grid size is 1,000 and it has actually pulled over to the browser 1,000 records, it's only loaded 30 of them. So if you have one of these large monitors and a high font resolution, you won't have a situation that looks like this, but you might have your 30 coming down to here and have white space below it. If that is the case, we provide you with that little button down here, and I'm going to just go ahead and click on it. Click it, and it will alter the grid size from 30 to 50. Now, as you can see in my case, it's still not enough, but our assumption is you're not operating in an environment as ludicrous as this one, where the font's super tiny or your monitor is obscenely large. So 30 should generally be more than enough. And if you have one of those systems here, I like to exist on 80. If you have one of those systems where 30 isn't enough, you can go ahead and click and work on the 60. If, however, 30 is enough, leave it on 30. It will make your performance better. That was one thing I did, we just actually ran through here, was you'll notice that when I went to 50 and then altered the screen size tremendously, I ended up with this weird environment where the scroll bar was way out of reach. In fact, it was way off. The bottom of the scroll bar was way off the bottom of the screen. Let me reconstruct that scenario here for you again. Hold on. Let's do this again, this silliness. Okay, we do click here. Okay, now I'm going to make the screen size big again. This was the point I was making. Of course, you wouldn't do this, but it sometimes happens for various reasons that your scroll bar drops below. At that point, you either need to refresh by clicking on this button, or sometimes, as the case was here, I was just able to scroll down and the bar resized for me. So that's all I wanted to show you in terms of an overview. There are a lot of different things to the grid, and we will explore those in these other videos, namely things like the right click, the filters, stuff like that. So check out any of these other videos if you're interested in it, but hopefully that gets you started. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to post them on the message board.